They called her the librarian, because she moved as if sound were a foreign language she refused to learn. Specialist Anya Voronova was a woman etched from quiet corners and faded light. Her presence in the dust-choked forward operating base a study in deliberate unobtrusiveness. She was older than the raw-boned infantrymen by 2 decades. Her face a map of experiences they couldn't begin to chart. The lines around her eyes not from laughter, but from long hours spent staring at horizons that promised nothing but trouble. Her assignment was gunner on an MAV-7, an armored behemoth the crews had nicknamed Cerberus. To the ambitious, it was a dead-end posting, a place for has-beens and washouts. To Anya, it was simply a place. Colonel Madsen saw her file and frowned. The paper told a story of commendations for marksmanship, a short, decorated career in a support role, and then a long, baffling stretch of administrative duty. He saw her age, noted her gender, and the equation in his mind produced a simple, damning answer. A liability. He tapped the file on his desk, the sound a sharp crack in the air-conditioned hush of his command tent. "I don't like it," he said to his aide, a young captain with an immaculate uniform. "We're on the knife's edge here. We need killers, not clerks who got lost on their way to the archives." The captain nodded, his face a mask of agreement. The colonel's word was gospel, and the sight of the quiet, middle-aged woman cleaning the optics on a 30mm cannon was an unsettling anomaly in his ordered world. The institutional doubt trickled down the chain of command like poison. Sergeant Finch, the platoon's senior non-commissioned officer and vehicle commander for Cerberus, made her his personal project of derision. He was a man carved from granite and cynicism, his voice a perpetual rasp from years of shouting over engine roar. During drills, he watched her with predatory stillness. Her movements were fluid, economical, each action flowing into the next with a disturbing lack of hesitation. She didn't slam levers or stab buttons. She guided them, her hands seeming to coax the machinery into compliance. Finch saw this grace and mistook it for frailty. He saw her silence and mistook it for fear. "Come on, Grandma," he'd bark over the internal comms during a simulated targeting run. "The war won't wait for you to find your reading glasses. Light it up." The simulated targets, red diamonds on her screen, would already be gone, each serviced with a theoretical burst so precise it barely registered as an event. She never replied to his taunts. She would simply reset the system, her breathing a slow, even tide inside her helmet. The final score would flash on his monitor, a perfect run. Finch would grunt, dismissing it as a fluke of the simulator's simple programming. "Anyone can get lucky," he'd mutter to the driver. "Let's see how she does when the targets are shooting back." Lieutenant Graves, the platoon leader, was even less convinced. Barely 25, with a spine stiffened by academy arrogance, he saw Anya as an unacceptable variable in his quest for a flawless operational record. He saw a woman who should be stateside packing supply manifests, not occupying a critical combat role in his lead vehicle. He went to Colonel Madsen directly, his posture ramrod straight, his words carefully chosen. "Sir, with all due respect, Specialist Voronova's presence on the lead gun is a tactical concern. Her reflexes may not be optimal. I'd feel more confident with her assigned to a logistics vehicle." Madsen considered it. He shared the lieutenant's apprehension. But reassigning personnel was a bureaucratic headache, and the convoy escort mission was in less than 48 hours. "Your concern is noted, Lieutenant," Madsen said, his tone final. "But she stays. Make it work." Graves left the tent with a tight jaw, the dismissal stinging more than any reprimand. He would make it work, but he would place the blame squarely on Anya's shoulders if anything went wrong. Only one person saw something different. Private Cole, the driver of Cerberus, was a boy of 19 with grease permanently etched into the lines of his hands. He was a mechanic first, a driver second, and he understood machinery with an intimacy that bordered on the spiritual. He watched Anya. He saw the way she ran her pre-operation checks, her fingers tracing the power conduits to the gunnery system not just to see if they were connected, but to feel their integrity. He saw her spend hours in the motor pool after everyone else had gone to the mess hall, meticulously cleaning the main cannon's breech with a surgeon's focus. She treated the vehicle not as a pile of steel and wires, but as a living partner. One evening, as she was wiping down the targeting optics, her sleeve slid up her forearm for a brief moment. Cole caught a glimpse of it. A small, faded tattoo just above her wrist. It was a single black raven, its wings partly furled, its head cocked as if listening to a secret. It was a stark, somber image that seemed utterly out of place, yet perfectly suited to the woman who bore it. He didn't ask about it. He knew better. He simply filed the image away, another piece of the puzzle that was Specialist Voronova. The puzzle of the woman who could strip and reassemble the coaxial machine gun blindfolded, whose quiet hands moved with an unnerving, absolute confidence. The woman they all thought was a liability. The woman Cole was beginning to believe was the most dangerous person on the entire base. The mission briefing was terse, the air in the tent thick with the smell of stale coffee and anxiety. A critical supply convoy had to be escorted through the Tarik Valley, a narrow pass of rock and shadow that had earned the grim nickname the Gauntlet. Enemy activity was high, but intelligence on their strength and disposition was, as the briefer put it, aspirational. Lieutenant Graves' platoon would take the lead. Cerberus would be the point vehicle. Graves had objected again and been overruled again. He stood now, his jaw set, staring at the map as if he could incinerate the valley with the force of his gaze alone. The convoy rolled out under a bruised dawn sky. The air was cool, but held the promise of blistering heat. Inside the gunner's station of Cerberus, Anya was encased in a world of muted green light and humming electronics. The steel shell of the vehicle muted the world, reducing it to vibrations felt through the seat and the floor plates. She didn't hear the rumble of the engine so much as feel it in her bones. A familiar, steady heartbeat. For the first time in a long time, the noise in her own head began to quiet. The years of forced stillness, of sterile offices and meaningless paperwork, began to slough away. This, she remembered, was her true state of being. Not the quiet librarian, but the silent hunter, her senses extended through kilometers of wire and finely ground glass. Her eyes scanned the landscape on her thermal display, her mind processing the terrain with an ingrained, automatic calculus. She read the heat signatures of rocks warmed by the morning sun, the subtle patterns of dust kicked up by the wind, the way shadows lay unnaturally across a shallow ravine. She was not just looking, she was listening with her eyes. Contact. Her voice was low and even on the internal calm, devoid of alarm. Ridge at 2 o'clock. 400 meters. A glint. Possible optics. Lieutenant Graves' voice crackled back, laced with impatience. I have eyes on it, Gunner. The sun on Micah. I've told you about that. Stay on your designated sector. Don't call out shadows. Anya said nothing. She held her targeting reticle on the spot for another 3 seconds, her finger resting near the trigger stud. The glint was gone. But it hadn't been Micah.
Mika Shimarat.
This had been a single, hard point of light instantly suppressed. The work of a trained scout. She knew it with a certainty that was as physical as a pressure in her chest. She filed the information, tagged the coordinate in her mind, and continued her sweep. Beside her, in the driver's compartment, Cole heard the exchange. He felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He'd learned to trust the lieutenant's maps and his platoon sergeant's experience, but in the last few weeks, he had developed a different kind of faith. It was a faith in the quiet woman who knew the soul of his machine better than he did. He eased his foot slightly off the accelerator, letting the distance to the vehicle ahead grow by a few precious meters. A little extra room to maneuver. He didn't know why he did it. It was just an instinct, a response to the calm certainty in her voice. The tension inside Cerberus was a living thing, settled into the air, thick and metallic. Sergeant Finch sat in the commander's seat above and behind Anya, his eyes flicking between his own screen and the path ahead, his knuckles white where he gripped the handholds. He chewed on a piece of gum with a furious rhythm, the only sound other than the hum of the electronics and the thrum of the engine. The valley narrowed, the rock walls rising on either side like jagged teeth. The sun climbed higher, baking the steel hull of the vehicle. Anya's focus narrowed with the terrain. Her world was the screen now, a mosaic of heat and shadow. And in that world, A memory surfaced, unbidden. Not a scene, but a collection of sensations, sharp and violent. The sharp, electric smell of ozone after a missile strike. The deafening roar of a fighter jet's afterburner kicking in directly overhead. A voice, frantic but familiar, screaming a single word into her headset. Nyx. The name echoed in the silent chambers of her mind. Nyx, the goddess of night. Her call sign from another life, another war. A life she had buried under years of carefully constructed anonymity. She remembered a promise, whispered over the body of a fallen comrade, the coppery scent of blood in the air. Promise to live a quiet life, to leave the ghosts behind. A promise she was about to shatter into a million pieces. The convoy lumbered deeper into the gauntlet. The road ahead twisted, disappearing behind a massive outcrop of rock. This was the choke point. If there was a trap, this was where it would be sprung. Anya's gaze swept the ridges, the scree slopes, the dark mouths of small caves dotting the cliffs. She saw it then. Not a glint this time, but a flicker of movement. A heat signature that bloomed and then vanished behind a boulder. Too large for an animal, too fast for a civilian. Multiple contacts, she said, her voice still impossibly calm. Ridgeline, both sides. They're in position. I don't see anything, Voronova. Graves snapped over the platoon net. Maintain discipline on the comms. But it was too late. The world erupted. The first explosion was a deafening concussion that slammed Cerberus sideways. A rocket-propelled grenade had struck the lead truck just ahead of them, turning it into a blossoming fireball of orange and black. Immediately, the air was filled with the demonic chatter of heavy machine guns and the sharp, percussive crack of sniper fire from the ridges. Mortar rounds began to walk their way down the convoy, each explosion a seismic shock that vibrated through the hull. Chaos bloomed on the comms net, a cacophony of panicked shouts, static, and screams. Contact front. Contact left. We're taking heavy fire. Vehicle 2 is hit. I repeat, Vehicle 2 is hit. Graves' voice rose above the din, thin and cracking with panic. Fall back. All units, reverse. Break contact. It was the worst possible order. Reversing in the narrow pass would create a bottleneck, a perfect kill box for the mortar teams. Inside Cerberus, an alarm blared. The command and control data link was down, severed by enemy jamming. They were deaf and blind, cut off from the rest of the platoon. Sergeant Finch was frozen, his mouth agape, staring at the carnage on his screen. Private Cole gripped the driving controls, his body rigid with fear. He looked at the chaos unfolding outside, then glanced at the small monitor showing him the back of Anya's helmet. He looked to her as a man lost in a blizzard looks for the North Star. "Ma'am?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper into the calm orders. Time seemed to slow. The cacophony faded. For Anya, the world contracted to the glowing green rectangle of her targeting display. The fear, the doubt, the years of quiet resentment. It all burned away, leaving behind a core of pure, cold clarity. She was no longer Specialist Voronova, the librarian. She was Nyx, and the night had come to the Tarik Valley. Her voice came over the internal calm, not loud, but carrying an authority that was absolute. It cut through the fear like a surgeon's scalpel. Hold steady, Cole. Drive on my mark. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a coronation. Her hands moved over the controls. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation. It was a dance she had known her entire life. Her thumb depressed the firing stud for the 30mm autocannon. The sound was a deep, guttural roar that vibrated through the entire vehicle. On a ledge 300 meters away, an RPG team that was drawing a bead on them simply ceased to exist, vanishing in a cloud of pulverized rock and red mist. "Target," she said, her voice a calm metronome against the thunder of the cannon. Another team was setting up a heavy machine gun, its fire pinning down the survivors from the first truck. She didn't spray the area. Her reticle settled on the gunner. A 3-round burst. The gunner was thrown backward like a doll. The reticle shifted a meter to the left, to the ammo bearer. Another burst. The stream of tracers pinning down the infantrymen ceased. Threat neutralized. Holy shit! Finch breathed from the commander's seat, finally snapping out of his stupor. Graves was still screaming on the net, his voice a frantic, useless squeal. Gunner 1-4, what is your status? I gave an order to fall back. Acknowledge. Anya ignored him. She was already reading the enemy's design. They weren't just attacking. They were herding, driving the survivors from their disabled vehicles into a pre-sighted kill zone at the bottom of a scree slope. Cole, she ordered. Forward 20 meters. Left flank. Give me an angle on that ravine. Without a word, Cole obeyed. He trusted the voice. He gunned the engine, and Cerberus lurched forward, pivoting, the steel tracks churning up dust. The movement was bold, insane, pushing them deeper into the ambush, but he did it without question. The new position opened up a firing lane into a shallow wash where a squad of enemy fighters was massing for the final assault. They never got the chance. The autocannon spoke again, a long, controlled river of fire that swept the wash from one end to the other. The enemy squad was not just suppressed. It was erased. Anya's target acquisition was supernatural. The vehicle's targeting computer whined, struggling to keep up as she manually designated and destroyed one threat after another. She was faster than the machine. 10 enemy fighters down, then 20. She was a conductor orchestrating a symphony of destruction. A mortar pit on a high ridge. She switched to the main gun, the targeting solution appearing in her mind before the computer could calculate it. The deep thump hiss of the cannon, a momentary pause, and then the ridge erupted in a geyser of earth and fire. The mortar fell silent. 30, 40. The rest of the platoon, what was left of it, saw what was happening. They saw Cerberus, a lone steel beast, charge into the heart of the firestorm and single-handedly dismantle the ambush. The sight was so audacious, so impossible, that it shocked them out of their fear. Inspired, they began to fight back. Suppressed squads found cover and returned fire. Another vehicle, seeing Anya's maneuver, pushed forward to support her flank. The tide of the battle, which had been a torrent of death, began to turn. A heavily armed technical, a pickup truck with a mounted cannon, burst from behind a rock formation. It was the enemy command element trying to escape the collapsing pocket. It sped across the valley floor, jinking and weaving. For any other gunner, it would have been an impossible shot. For Anya, it was geometry. She tracked it, her movements fluid, leading the target by a precise, calculated margin. The main gun fired again. The shell screamed across the valley and struck the truck dead center. The resulting explosion was massive, a punctuation mark on the massacre. With their leadership vaporized, the ambush shattered. The remaining enemy fighters broke and ran, melting back into the rocks from which they had come. And then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. The valley fell silent. The only sounds the crackle of burning wreckage, the pained groans of the wounded, and the steady, rhythmic hum of Cerberus's engine. The entire engagement had lasted less than 5 minutes. The kill counter on Anya's display read 52. A stunned silence descended over the platoon comms net. The airwaves that had been choked with screams and static were now dead quiet. Then, a single, hesitant voice from the commander of Vehicle 3, filled with a disbelief that bordered on religious awe. Jesus Christ, what just happened? Who was that on gun 1-4? No one answered. Lieutenant Graves stumbled out of his disabled command vehicle, his face pale, streaked with dust and sweat. He stared at the unbelievable devastation wrought upon the valley walls. He saw the burning husks of enemy positions, the silent, still forms scattered across the ridges. And in the center of it all, sitting like an ancient, immovable idol, was Cerberus. Its cannon, still smoking slightly, was pointed down the valley, a silent sentinel. He looked at the vehicle, then back at the carnage, and his mind simply refused to process it. Inside Cerberus, the adrenaline began to recede from Anya's system, leaving a profound weariness in its wake. Her hands, which had been so steady, trembled slightly as she rested them on the control grips. She took a slow, deep breath and closed her eyes for a single long moment. The green glow of the screen faded, and there was only darkness. Cole sat in the driver's seat, staring at the back of her helmet. He wanted to say something, to ask something, but no words would come. He had just witnessed a miracle of violence, and he didn't know how to speak in its presence. Back at the forward operating base, Colonel Madsen stood frozen in his command tent, staring at the data streaming in from the battlefield. The casualty reports were grim, but the after-action telemetry from Cerberus was impossible. 52 confirmed enemy kills? He asked his aide, his voice low and dangerous. Attributed to a single gunner? Is that a glitch? The young captain checked the data feed again. No, sir. The system is verified. 52 hostiles neutralized. The engagement lasted 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Sir, she didn't just repel the ambush. She annihilated it. Madsen sank into his chair, the file for Specialist Anya Voronova still on his desk. He picked it up, his gaze falling on the long sections that were blacked out with heavy redaction markers. He had dismissed them as bureaucratic padding, records of a forgotten supply clerk. Now he saw them for what they were. Silent monuments to a past he couldn't even imagine. He looked at his aide, his expression one of dawning, horrified respect. "Get me her full file," he commanded, his voice barely a whisper. "The real one. Unseal it. I don't care what clearances I have to break." The return journey was a somber, silent procession. When the battered convoy finally limped through the gates of the FOB, the soldiers lining the road weren't looking at the damaged vehicles or the weary infantrymen. Their eyes were fixed on one machine, Cerberus. They watched as the gunner's hatch hissed open and a figure emerged. It was the quiet, older woman they called the librarian. The whispers spread through the crowd like wildfire, but the old nickname was gone, replaced by a new one, spoken in hushed, reverent tones. The gunner. Sergeant Finch climbed down from the commander's hatch, his face ashen. He saw Anya on the ground, methodically beginning her post-operation checks, as if nothing had happened. He walked toward her, stopped, and for the first time since she had arrived, he couldn't meet her eyes. He simply gave a short, sharp nod, a gesture not of command, but of profound, humbled deference. Lieutenant Graves approached her next, his academy posture gone, his arrogance shattered. He looked like a boy who had just seen the face of God and found it terrifying. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. All the things he wanted to say, the apology, the questions, the accusations, died before they were born. "Thank you," he finally managed to stammer, the words feeling small and utterly inadequate. Anya paused her work, her gaze meeting his for a brief moment. Her eyes were calm, holding no trace of triumph or accusation. She simply nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement, not acceptance. She didn't need his gratitude. She turned back to the vehicle, her attention already focused on the task at hand. She walked toward the cavernous maintenance bay, the sounds of the base fading behind her. As she moved, the cuff of her dusty uniform slipped down her arm, exposing the skin of her wrist to the harsh afternoon sun. Private Cole, standing by the entrance, saw it clearly this time. The small, black raven, its eye seeming to watch him. He finally understood. She wasn't just a good gunner. She wasn't even just a soldier. She was something else. A relic from a different war. A ghost who had been hiding in plain sight. The maintenance bay was cool and dark, smelling of oil and hot steel. The noises of the base were a distant murmur. It was a sanctuary. Anya was alone with Cerberus, her partner in the brief, brutal dance. She ran a cloth over the cannon's breech, her movements as gentle and precise as a mother tending to a child. The machine had been her voice, and now she was soothing it back to silence. She placed her palm flat against the cool, scarred hull, a silent communion of thanks. The great steel beast seemed to sigh under her touch. "They told me Nix was retired." The voice came from the shadows at the entrance of the bay. It was Colonel Madsen. He stood there, his uniform immaculate, but his posture stripped of its usual authority. He was not a commander addressing a subordinate. He was a pilgrim before a shrine. Anya didn't turn around. She didn't even pause in the slow, rhythmic motion of her hand cleaning the gun. She let the silence stretch for a long moment, a space for his words to be absorbed by the vast, quiet room. "Nix is a ghost," she said finally, her voice soft, yet carrying to every corner of the bay. "Ghosts are meant to be quiet." Madsen nodded slowly to himself, though she couldn't see him. He understood. This hadn't been a return to glory. It had been a violation of a hard-won peace, a promise broken out of necessity. He had demanded a killer, and a ghost from a forgotten war had answered the call. Now she wanted only to return to the shadows. He turned without another word and walked away, leaving her to the silence she so clearly craved. Anya remained, her hand resting on the warm steel of the cannon, the dark wings of the raven on her wrist a stark, silent promise in the fading light.